In this story, a seemingly routine encounter takes an unexpected turn when a strong-willed officer finds herself facing someone who knows their rights inside and out. Tensions rise as a simple ID request spirals into a test of patience, authority, and self-awareness. The officer, confident in her authority, quickly learns that not everyone will back down without a fight, especially when they're armed with knowledge of the law. What starts as a routine stop becomes a moment of reckoning as the individual firmly stands their ground, calmly challenging the officer's approach. The officer's frustration grows, but it's clear this isn't going to be an easy power play. In just a matter of seconds, the balance of control begins to shift, leaving both parties and onlookers stunned. How does this officer respond when faced with a challenge she didn't see coming? And what lessons might be learned in the process? Stick around to see how this confrontation unfolds in a way no one expected. As the officer tightened her stance, her expression shifted, revealing a mix of authority and irritation. She repeated her demand for identification, her voice firm and unyielding. The individual, however, remained calm and steady, their tone respectful but unwavering. "Am I being detained?" they asked, a question loaded with legal weight that seemed to catch the officer slightly off guard. The air grew tense as curious bystanders began to take notice of the exchange. Cars slowed as drivers glanced over, and a small crowd quietly gathered at a distance, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. The officer hesitated for a split second, as if searching for the right response, but quickly recovered, doubling down on her authority. This wasn't the first time she had been challenged on the job, but something about this encounter felt different. The person's confidence, their understanding of their rights. It was clear this wasn't someone who could be intimidated easily. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the tension continued to build. The officer's demeanor grew more rigid as she stepped closer, trying to assert her authority. "You're required to show me your ID," she said sharply, her tone leaving little room for argument. But the individual stood their ground, calmly replying, "Unless I'm being detained or suspected of a crime, I don't have to provide it. Am I free to go?" Her frustration was evident now, and it was clear she hadn't anticipated this level of pushback. The crowd watched in silence, their curiosity now laced with unease. Was this about to escalate? The officer glanced around, perhaps aware of the eyes on her, and seemed to wrestle with her next move. Meanwhile, the individual remained composed, their confidence unwavering. They weren't disrespectful, but their calmness seemed to unnerve her even more. It wasn't just about the ID anymore, it was about control, about how far she could push her authority. The silence between them felt heavy, like a standoff with no clear winner yet in sight. The officer's jaw tightened as she weighed her options, the tension palpable in the air. She took a deliberate step closer, her tone growing firmer. "If you refuse to comply, there will be consequences," she said, her voice laced with warning. But the individual didn't flinch, their steady gaze meeting hers. "I respect your job, officer, but I also know my rights," they replied, their voice calm but resolute. The crowd around them seemed to hold its breath, the quiet murmurs now replaced with an uneasy silence. Someone in the back whispered, "This could go south fast," while others exchanged nervous glances. The officer, visibly irritated, reached for her radio, her movements sharp and deliberate. It was clear she wasn't used to being challenged like this, and the growing audience only added to the pressure. The individual, however, didn't waver. They stood firm, their posture confident yet non-threatening. The officer's hand hovered near her radio, her frustration boiling just below the surface. It was a moment that could shift in any direction, and everyone watching felt the weight of what might happen next. Just as the officer's fingers hovered over the radio, another voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" A man stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, his tone steady but inquisitive. Dressed casually, he looked like any other bystander, but there was something about the way he carried himself, calm and commanding, that shifted the dynamic immediately. The officer turned toward him, her irritation flashing for a moment before she tried to regain her composure. "This is a law enforcement matter," she said curtly, clearly trying to dismiss him. But the man didn't back away. "I couldn't help but notice the exchange," he said, his words deliberate. "And I happen to know quite a bit about constitutional rights." The crowd's attention shifted, their whispers growing louder as they realized this was no ordinary bystander. The officer's face hardened as the man continued, "If they haven't committed a crime, you're on shaky ground here." His calm confidence seemed to rattle her further, and now all eyes were on her, waiting to see how she would respond. The tension had reached a boiling point, and it was clear the situation was about to take a dramatic turn. The officer's face flushed as the man's words hung in the air. She hesitated, glancing back at the individual who remained calm and composed. The growing crowd watched with anticipation, sensing the situation was reaching its breaking point. "I don't need anyone interfering," the officer said sharply, her voice carrying an edge of frustration. But the man wasn't deterred. "Interfering?" he asked with a calm smile. "I'm just ensuring everyone's rights are respected. And if this goes any further, you might find yourself in a tough spot legally." The officer's confidence seemed to waver for the first time, her authority slipping as the weight of the situation dawned on her. Finally, she took a step back, her posture stiff as she muttered, "You're free to go." The individual nodded politely, offering a quiet, "Thank you, officer," before turning to leave. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves, but just as the tension seemed to dissipate, the man turned back. "Oh, and officer," he said with a knowing look. "Next time, make sure you're following proper protocol. Cameras up everywhere." He gestured toward a bystander holding a phone before walking away. The officer stood frozen, the realization hitting her that this encounter might not be over, not with so many eyes watching and recording. It was a humbling moment she wouldn't soon forget. As the crowd dispersed, a quiet hum of conversations lingered in the air. The officer remained rooted in place for a moment, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. She glanced around, realizing that the phones capturing the interaction weren't just tools, they were witnesses. Her stern exterior softened slightly, though her pride kept her from fully acknowledging what had unfolded. The individual walked away calmly, their confidence still intact. They didn't gloat or look back, but their actions had spoken louder than any words could. The man who had stepped in offered them a brief nod of approval before heading in the opposite direction. For those who had witnessed it all, the moment left a lasting impression. Standing up for your rights doesn't require hostility, just knowledge and composure. By the time the scene cleared, the officer had returned to her vehicle, her expression pensive. Perhaps this was a moment of reflection for her, a chance to reconsider her approach and what it means to enforce the law fairly. For everyone else, it was a powerful reminder of the importance of knowing your rights and staying calm under pressure.